Let's face it, in our busy lives, we don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. In fact, according to the CDC, only 1 in 10 Americans are eating the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables each day, missing out on essential vitamins, minerals, fibers, and antioxidants. And that's where Balance in Nature comes in. Balance in Nature sources only the best produce, free from pesticides, heavy metals, and harmful bacteria. And Balance in Nature is the best fruit and vegetable product on the market. They use only fresh, whole fruits and vegetables inside each capsule. They don't use any GMOs, fillers, binding agents, or preservatives of any kind. You're getting real food, real science, real nutrition. I would never endorse a product that I don't use myself, and since using Balance in Nature, I feel more alert, I have more energy, my focus is sharper, and I feel great. Live life to the fullest and choose Balance in Nature. And guess what? P.A.S. Report listeners can get 35% off the first preferred order. Start getting the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables you need by using code PAS at balanceofnature.com.
Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. As your host, Nick Giordano. Glad you could be here. Today, I have an informative episode lined up for you, and I'm going to explain how the forgotten middle class is getting decimated. And we are the forgotten middle class. When you look at policies, not only are they not beneficial, but these policies are harming the country. They are harming our states, and they are harming our communities and our way of life, and yet they continue to push forward with these policies. It's clear to see. Now, why are they pushing these policies that they know will do more harm over the long term? And the answer is relatively simple. It's because they would rather virtue signal as opposed to doing their actual job they were elected to do. It's strange. Something has happened over the last 2 decades. Our policies are now based on emotions and virtue signaling rather than reason, logic, and common sense. That is absolutely clear. Just think about the fact that we are talking about energy shortages in America and Europe. That is an embarrassment, and for this episode, I'm going to highlight some policies and explain how they're going to do real long-term harm to the country and our way of life. They're already doing short-term harm, but the media wants to ignore it. Those pushing these policies constantly say that we have to sacrifice for the greater good, that it's the forgotten middle class, that our quality of life has to decline so that they can push a radical agenda. No one ever asks what these people have to sacrifice. And it seems the forgotten middle class is always the ones shoulder the burden, the ones to get shafted. And for what? It's not like these policies benefit us. It's not like they're going to make us stronger as a country. You know, if the politicians and the officials came out and said, hey, we're going to reduce spending by 20% in every single department and agency that exists in order to get fiscally responsible, start to bring down the national debt, then that's one thing. I understand the sacrifices that need to be made. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about spending even more money on policies that won't even work in the first place. Now, before I jump in, be sure to click the follow button so you never miss an episode. Visit the PAS Report website, PASreport.com. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. Before I jump into the main topic of today, I want to briefly bring up 2 things. The first is 9/11. I released an excellent episode on Monday. I interviewed Steve Kerr and Rich Rotans, both great guys, decades of experience when it comes to disasters. They've seen it all. They're like brothers to me. It was a great episode, so make sure you listen. But what I found disturbing on 9/11 was the coverage, or the lack thereof, I should say, because I didn't see the coverage that we should be seeing. I mean, this is a sacred, solemn day. Here is the 21st anniversary. Nearly 3,000 Americans lost their lives that day. They were murdered. And nearly 5,000 heroes have lost their lives from 9/11 related illnesses. These heroes, it includes first responders, construction workers, volunteers, and so many more. You would think that the networks would have dedicated more time to the events that day. You would think they would have dedicated more time to the lives lost. You would think that they would have focused on all those families that were impacted and continue to be impacted by 9/11. And that's what these networks should have focused on. The networks also should have explained how the threat of Al-Qaeda and groups like ISIS have morphed and changed. Unfortunately, you have these sick, demented fools, the talking heads in the media. Not only did they not really speak about Al-Qaeda at all, instead, they started talking about the enemies from within, which is anyone that disagrees with their point of view. It was really sick, even down to the Homeland Security Secretary, Mayorkas. I mean, he should be ashamed of himself, and I'm not bringing up the border. So I'm not even putting that on the table yet. But giving a speech and saying that the new threat is essentially political dissent in the United States, that those are the real threat going forward, not Al-Qaeda, is shameful. And he should resign immediately. You know, these people exist to serve us, and the media exists to report news, which most media outlets don't even do that anymore. But they also exist to educate audiences, and they're failing to do that as well. Now, I found the scaled-down version of 9/11 to be shameful, and it's getting worse and worse every year. I noticed it a few years ago that we're starting to see less coverage. I mean, New York Times didn't even cover it. You had the Drudge Report, didn't even have it in the headlines. It was truly disgusting. And I am of the mindset that we actually need more coverage of 9/11, not less. We need more. Especially because we have an entire post-9/11 generation. So you have so many that are born after 9/11, and they lack a personal connection to that day. They need to know what happened that day and how it changed our way of life. Sadly, the new generations, they'll never know what it was like to live in a pre-9/11 world. But we need to focus on this event, and we should be doing it more so to educate the newer generations coming up. I was also bothered on Sunday over how the Queen's passing received nearly the same amount of coverage as 9/11 anniversary did, or even more. Some networks even led with the Queen's passing over 9/11 coverage. Now, no disrespect to the Queen in any way, but 9/11 is a sacred day in America, and it should be treated as such. As far as the Queen goes, I understand the significance. She was a remarkable woman that did remarkable things, led a remarkable life. She was a leader, and leaders lead. Unfortunately, we don't have many leaders anymore, and that's part of the problem. That's what she did. She led. Consider that she was the Queen for all the people. It wasn't about the Labour Party. It wasn't about the Tories. That's what made her so remarkable. She is the only Queen to have existed in my lifetime, and I still don't know what her politics are. She didn't get into the politics of things. She didn't advocate for left policies or right policies. She stayed above the fray, and that's what leaders tend to do. She was 96 years old, lived an amazing life. Father Time kicks in at some point. Unfortunately, now Charles will take the reins, and he's a dope. Let's just be honest. Hopefully he does a good job, I'm hoping. But he is someone that was very political prior to this, so hopefully he scales that down. He should have passed the crown to William, because I think William's more like his grandmother. I have no idea where he stands on the political issues. But one thing that scares me is we are seeing nearly every Western institution going through major transformations, and it's not for the better. With the Queen gone, can King Charles maintain the dignity of the royal family? Can he be above the fray and be a leader for all? Or will he push the monarchy further towards irrelevancy? Now, only time will tell, and we got to give him a chance. But in the meantime, we have to say, may the Queen rest in peace. And we are now witnessing a turning of the page in history. So we'll see where it goes from there. Now, getting to the main topic, there seems to be a lot of people in the United States who have no clue what fascism is, right? Fascism, the new word of the day. These people, they love to regurgitate things when they hear a word. It's amazing. Like, I've never heard insurrection used so much, or sedition. Prior to January 6th, most people had no idea what that word meant. Now it's morphed into a coup, and they tried to stop the peaceful transition of power, and these are fascists. There's fascists all over the place. Disagree with someone, they're fascists, right? Well, what does fascism actually mean? I mean, when you hear all these people constantly use the word fascism, what does it mean? I mean, we should have a definition, and I'll explain what fascism is about, and then I'm going to point several policies showing how the forgotten middle class is getting decimated, how the policies are all based on emotions and public virtue signaling, as opposed to reason, logic, and common sense. But in previous episodes, I've talked about how the left constantly tries to redefine words and ideas, right? And unfortunately, they get away with it. That's the annoying part. That's the frustrating part to me. Whether it's the idea of nationalism, whether it's patriotism, whether it's the idea of democracy, they're constantly redefining these things to mean different things. And I'm growing sick and tired of those who constantly throw around the word fascism without any regard or idea for what that word means. Sorry, but you can't just make stuff up. You can't label half the country fascist without explaining and thinking that you could get away with it. All too often, academics love to make it as if fascism is some conservative concept, that it's a far-right concept. That's a lie, and the academics know it. They're just too lazy to either A, do the research, or they're too dishonest to actually speak about it properly. So even though the word fascist gets thrown around constantly, we have to define it. And in a fascist society, the nation-state is the all-powerful entity. It's ruled by an autocrat, by a dictator. There is a strict regimentation over the economy, over foreign policy, over all aspects of social life. The person in charge will determine every aspect of life. Everything that is done has to be done to benefit the state, to empower the government. All threats to the nation state and the government apparatus must be crushed and eliminated. And that's what fascism is. So this begs the question, why are those who call for limited government, people who want to take power away from the government, away from the institutions, and give that power back to the people, why are people like myself being declared fascists? Well, the answer is kind of simple and twofold. First, always accuse your political opposition of what you're guilty of. These people are master manipulators, and they know the power of rhetoric. They also know that they got the cover of the mainstream media, the media industrial complex. And if you repeat something often enough, people start to tend to believe it. The second reason is that the opposition, conservatives and Republicans in particular, are morons. There's no doubt about it, especially those in leadership positions. Just take Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, one of the most powerful figures in the Republican caucus. President Biden gives his now infamous September 1st speech declaring nearly half the country as threats to democracy. As Senator Rick Scott pointed out, the president sounded like a raving lunatic. Whoever wrote that speech should be fired, but this is the way the actual administration thinks. You would think that one of the most powerful Republican senators would come out and defend his constituents. You would think he would defend the ordinary Americans who were slandered and viciously attacked. You would think that he would have the decency to do that. But that's not what happened. Senator McConnell went dark following President Biden's speech. He was MIA. I even put out a tweet calling him out. For any politician, Twitter is the best way to reach the masses. Even though it's a cesspool, it still is the best mode of communication to blast out a message. And I was monitoring his Twitter feed, and nothing. He didn't tweet at all. Finally, he emerged from hiding. The turtle came out of his shell last Thursday. But he didn't come out of his shell to defend his constituents, defend the people that voted for him, defend Republicans, defend conservatives from these attacks. He came out last Thursday to tweet out his condolences for the Queen's passing. Now, I have no problem with him tweeting out condolences, but my goodness, defend the ordinary American, say something, but he won't. And he won't because he's either doesn't care about his constituents, or maybe he actually agrees with the Biden administration. I don't know. Maybe someone should ask him about that. Either way, with leadership like that, who needs Democrats? I mean, if your own political leaders hate you, then you don't need an opposition, right? It's really stunning. And it wasn't just him. A lot of Republicans and conservatives remained silent and didn't say anything. Some of these Republicans and conservatives, they think like, oh, it's just midterm election, political banter, and he's just saying this to try and get Democrats elected. No, it's much more deeper and it's much more dangerous than that. This is not just your normal political rhetoric. It's not your normal political discourse. It is much deeper than that. And I've outlined, you compare the rhetoric with the actions of the administration, and it's very troubling what we're seeing. So getting back to the whole fascist thing, I call for government to have limited power. I call for our government to return to its proper role, where the federal government stops getting involved in the state's affairs. I call out the abuses of power within the bureaucracy. I'm against mandates. I don't care if it's being issued by Democrat officials or Republican officials. I'm against them. I don't believe in destroying people's lives and livelihoods all because they don't want to take something against their will. I don't like when executive orders cross the line and are designed to create, amend, or manipulate current laws. I explain how if legislators can't agree and come to a compromise, then so be it. Nothing gets done. Yet, according to the loons out there, I and people who think like me are fascist. That's the demented world that we live in today. And the reason they say fascism is right-wing is due to Mussolini's rise abetted by the corporate world. Those in academia, where most aren't the deepest thinkers, even though they believe they are, where most of these people in academia believe that they're much more smarter than they really are, they have labeled it right-wing due to the corporate elite and the promotion of patriotism within a fascist society, where everything's done for the state. However, that's not what fascism is really about. Remember, in a fascist society, the state has strict control over the economy. The corporations are still beholden to the authority of the state and must do the state's bidding. It is nothing more than corporatism and the blurring of the lines, the merging of the corporate world, the corporate giants, and the government. The state is the center of economic life. And if these people looked into Mussolini, they would know that Mussolini was a one-time radical socialist, right? You're going to use the corporate world as a means to an end. If you look in the United States, what's happening now? Well, isn't it the same thing, right? When the corporate world gets to dictate and punish Georgia because duly elected members of the state legislative body passed a law, a voting law, and the governor signed that following the constitutional process, and the corporations don't like it, the Democrats don't like it, and so Georgia must be punished because they dared to defy the ruling elite. That's not right-wing, that's not conservative, that's not Republican. See, people try and equate capitalism with fascism. But capitalism and fascism are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Now, we constantly preach that we're a capitalist society, but we're really not. And I've explained that before. Capitalists believe market forces are the best way to drive economies. Government involvement in the economy should be extremely limited. Capitalists believe competition is the best way to keep corporations honest, and that this competition is essential to prevent concentrations of power. Now, consider what we've all witnessed during the pandemic. Was it small businesses raking in record-breaking profits, or was it large corporations that do the government's bidding? When government officials unilaterally decided when people can leave their homes, where they could go, where they could shop, what businesses were essential, which ones weren't, who benefited? Was it Main Street? Was it the little guy? Or was it the corporate giants that have all these connections and relationships with government officials? It wasn't the little guy. It was the large corporate elites who became even more powerful. The small businesses were decimated. The forgotten middle class got decimated. But the ultra-wealthy, they grew wealthier. As I said a few weeks ago, let's not pretend we live in a capitalist society. Our government has been manipulating market forces for decades, determining who the winners are and who the losers are. And it's only gotten 10 times worse over the last couple of years as corrupt government officials attempt to socially engineer our society. Just take my corrupt governor here in New York State, the unelected Empress Hochul. It's now being reported that she contracted a company to the tune of $637 million taxpayer dollars for this company to provide COVID testing. Here's the kicker. This vendor was charging double what other vendors were charging for COVID testing. But it didn't matter because those other companies that were charging a cheaper price, they didn't give Hochul a $300,000 campaign donation. Interesting how that works. And most of you are probably unaware, but Empress Hochul suspended state contracting rules under the state of emergency. State contracting rules prioritize the lowest bidder who can realistically deliver on the services for whatever the contract's about. She suspended that. Now why? If it wasn't to benefit her friends. Remember, these people are frauds. It's corruption, not capitalism. And it's funny, when you constantly hear Democrats criticize the corporate elite, just look at the corporate elite. Look at where the donations flow, and you'll see the corporate elite are firmly in the corner of the Democrats. Ain't the Republicans anymore. If you want to see how Democrats artificially manipulate the economy, look no further than their green energy agenda. Now, I'm not against environmental policies. I want a clean environment. I say that time and time again. And I'm not saying that all aspects that we can't move towards a greener economy. But what they're doing now is pushing a radical agenda that's going to work against our self-interest, that's going to hurt us, and that's going to kill our standard of living. We are going to see a decline in our quality of life because their policies are based on nothing more than virtue signaling. They want to scare people to believe that the world is coming to an end. Humanity is going to be wiped out. And so they are the moral holy warriors that will push insane policies to save the earth and humanity. And understand, this has been going on for a long time, right? So we had global cooling in the 70s and 80s. Al Gore said, late 90s, that everything's going to be underwater. Long Island's not going to exist anymore, that the sea levels are going to rise. And it never came to fruition. Every prediction they make was wrong. Now, these manipulators understand how the game is played. And so when their predictions don't come true, what do you think their response is? Well, since we put in policies, we prevented it from happening. And now it's going to happen, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. They're always kicking the can down the road for the end of the world. These people are nothing more than the ones that you see on the street, that the world is coming to an end. And then the day they say the world is coming to an end, the day passes, and then they say, oh, well, we got it wrong. It's really this day. And then it passes. And people still believe the fools. It's amazing. We've all been there before. You want to get someone the perfect gift for the perfect occasion, but you have no idea what to get. Well, you don't have to rack your brain anymore. Gift baskets are perfect for any occasion, whether it's birthdays, holidays, corporate events, or a simple thank you. At designeryourselfgiftbaskets.com, you get to choose the theme and the products that go into the basket. You have a coffee lover? Try the K-Cup basket. You're looking for something special for the person that loves to barbecue? No problem. There's a basket for it. Make every basket unique to the person you're sending it to. And if you're in a rush and don't have time to customize the gift basket, it's not an issue because at DIYGB.com, you can choose from hundreds of pre-arranged baskets based on the occasion, theme, or recipient. And P.A.S. Report listeners get 10% off using code P.A.S. at checkout. So go to DIYGB.com, find the perfect gift for the perfect occasion, and use coupon code P.A.S. at checkout to get 10% off your order. Visit DIYGB.com today. And let's be honest, they're not doing anything to save the environment. This green energy sector, it's become a big business. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being spent each and every year. Who's becoming rich off this industry? I don't know, maybe we should look into that. And just think how much money the federal government provides in the form of grant funding to universities, institutions, scientists, and businesses to advance this agenda. Now, if you say that this agenda is based on all false information or this agenda is based on a lie, do you think you're going to get any grant funding? Do you think you're going to get any federal funds to help you with your research? Of course not. And the officials in charge are so manipulative in how they push these policies. You know, just look at the current administration's electric vehicle push. The president, the transportation secretary, the energy secretary, so many others. They stated that we have to feel pain at the pump to make this transition to electric vehicles, that it's going to be a painful process. And the forgotten middle class are going to be the ones that have to suffer. Think about that. Because they want to push this initiative, we are the ones that have to suffer. These vehicles are already out of most people's price range. No middle-class family can afford to purchase most electric vehicles. They say, well, we pass subsidies to make it more affordable, right? Just think about the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'll get to that in a minute. But do a little research. If you do some research about purchasing an electric vehicle, they try and make it appear as if it's affordable. But when you dig deeper, you'll find that it's not affordable. Okay, they stretch out payments for 7 years. That's 72 months of monthly car payments. How many people keep a car for 7 years? And it used to be that car loans were 5 years max. But of course, we have to manipulate things. So let's add 2 more years to car notes. And if you add 2 more years to car notes, well, it's going to look like they have a lower monthly payment, even though they're paying more interest for an extra 2 years than they used to be. So it's a hell of a lot more expensive than they think. What can possibly go wrong with this? Now imagine you purchase one of these vehicles, if you're lucky, one of the lucky ones, one of the elite that could actually afford it, and your warranty expires because of mileage. And your battery goes dead. Not only do you still have a couple years of payments left, but be prepared to fork over $15,000 to $20,000 for a new battery. I mean, wouldn't that be a kick in the you-know-what? And while most electric vehicles come with an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty, if you drive the standard 12,000 miles a year on a 7-year car note, by the time you have the car paid off, the car's going to have 84,000 miles on it. Good luck trying to sell that vehicle. The resale value would make it worthless, because if someone knows, well, hey, I mean, I'm going to be responsible on the hook to get a new battery for this thing, why bother buying a car like that? But even more to the point, remember, it depends on where you live. But if you're living in an area that has a lower cost of living, you still need to make over $110,000 a year to afford one of these vehicles. If you're living in an expensive state like New York, you have to make close to $200,000 a year to afford these vehicles. Then factor in children, all that stuff, and obviously for everyone it's going to be different. But most of these cars are out of reach for people, considering the average household income is about $67,000. Now, the government comes out there and these officials, but we're giving you a $7,500 tax credit for these vehicles. We included it in the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, the people that could afford these vehicles, do you think that these people need an extra $7,500? And here's the kicker, another one. After the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, GM and Ford announced that they were raising the prices of some of their electric vehicles anywhere between $6,000 and $8,000. Of course, GM and Ford said it has nothing to do with the bill. It has nothing to do with the $7,500 subsidy that people can now get. You know, in the words of President Biden, come on, man. There's even more to this, though. The average cost to have a charging station installed in your home is about $1,300. Your cost of electricity is going to increase as well. It's going to put more demands on the energy grid. When you bring that up, The public virtue signals would tell you, well, install solar panels on your home to bring down your cost of electricity. Well, the cost of solar panels, they vary greatly, but it could cost anywhere between $20,000 and $70,000. And by the way, if one of those panels break, you have to pay to repair it. Need roofing done? Not only are you going to have to pay for the roof, but you're also going to have to pay a company to remove the panels before the roofing gets done, and then have someone to put back up the panels once the job is complete. Doesn't that sound efficient? It sounds pretty costly to me, if you ask. Then you look at a state like California, where you have one of the king public virtue signalers, Gavin Newsom, who wants to phase out all gas-powered vehicles in the state. They want to ban all gas-powered vehicles by 2035, these geniuses that they are. Why don't they just put up a sign and say, hey, if you're a normal, ordinary American, just keep out of our state? Because besides the weather, the government wants to crush you here. This is insane on multiple levels. First off, there's going to be a whole hell of a lot of people that still can't afford electric vehicles. Secondly, California can't even keep the lights on now. Imagine if the majority of people are driving electric vehicles. That's going to be a catastrophic disaster. The state is already telling people not to use electricity during peak hours and don't plug in the electric vehicles during those peak hours. Now they want to quadruple grid demands. How do you think that's going to work out? And while peak hours are normally during the day, if everyone is plugging in their electric vehicles during the overnight period, peak hours are going to be 24 hours a day. That's what it's going to be. And no one still has explained to me, like, how a charging station is going to work in city areas, right? Urban centers. I mean, you have apartment complexes with hundreds of people in them. How exactly is that going to work? Are you going to have, like, all these charging stations on the street? And what happens if vandals come and destroy those charging stations? What happens when teenagers come and just, teenagers are going to do dumb things and they unplug it all overnight and everyone wakes up and their battery's dead in the morning? Like, how is this exactly going to work? I really don't understand it, but they don't really explain. And I'm getting ahead of myself because for Newsom's plan to work, to be even remotely realistic, the author of San Francisco, Michael Schallenberger, he stated that California would need to build dozens of power plants to be able to keep up with electricity demands. It doesn't make any sense that they would build gas or coal-fired plants, right? Because that's not carbon neutral. It would defeat the purpose of this order. Wind and solar certainly aren't going to be able to provide enough electricity, so that would only leave nuclear power plants. But oh wait, you can't build those in California either. This is the insanity that we're witnessing. See, this policy is not based on reasonable logic. It's not based on common sense. It's based on emotions and public virtue signaling. And they know that. But by the time it comes crashing down, good old Gavin, he's going to be long gone from California, never be held accountable for the stupid policy decisions that aren't steeped in reality and just public virtue signaling. And who do you think are going to be the ones that suffer? Who do you think are going to be the ones that suffer? It's going to be people like us. It's going to be the ordinary folks, the forgotten middle class. It isn't going to be the wealthy elitists that have their gas-powered generators, that have both gas-powered vehicles and their electric vehicles. It's a dumb idea, and they want to rush it so they could say they were the first in the nation to do it. But it has dire consequences for the people. And this is what happens when you manipulate the economy. This is what happens when you push policies just so you can say that you're a good person. And another thing they aren't telling you is that, to build these batteries obviously takes an enormous amount of Earth's resources, and these resources are not renewable resources. These are finite resources. It also takes a lot of gas and coal and oil to get these resources out of ground to produce these batteries. And China produces 90% of the electric vehicle batteries currently on the market. So not only does this policy hurt the ordinary residents of California and the state of California, it empowers China. It makes them wealthier. That kind of makes you think, doesn't it? And again, there's another kicker. See, I never let you down. I always provide you with information you probably didn't know about in the first place. It turns out that not only has China cornered the market on battery technology, but our own Department of Energy also gave China new cutting-edge battery technology. We spent $15 million taxpayer dollars at a government laboratory, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, creating this new technology where a battery the size of a refrigerator could power a home for decades. In 2017, we gave China a sublicense to work on these batteries. And in 2021, the Department of Energy transferred over the full license and the technological know-how for these batteries. Why isn't anyone in jail for this? Why aren't we seeing any type of congressional investigations into this? I mean, if you wanted to hurt the United States and make China a dominant power, this is exactly what you would do. So why are they doing this and no one asked that question? frustrating to say the least. The good news is that in our system here in the United States, the states serve as laboratories of experiment. If policies work, other states are going to adopt them. If policies fail, at least we didn't screw it up for the rest of the 50 states. Well, 49 states. And let California do what they want. Let them. Let's see how it works out for them. But do not try and nationalize these types of issues. Let the states serve their purpose. By nationalizing these issues, every state would be forced to comply, and a failed policy could prove to be catastrophic. So let the states serve as the laboratories of experiment. Now, another genius policy that these morons are pushing is wind turbines in the ocean, from Massachusetts down to North Carolina. Many of you may be completely unaware, but 1.7 million acres of the ocean have been leased for the potential to build these wind farms. So how does this affect you? Well, this has the potential to cause major disruption to the seafood industry. And while the ocean is vast, I mean, it's a pretty big damn ocean in the Atlantic, cutting off fishing vessels from 1.7 million acres is going to be a disaster. First of all, it's not like these fishing vessels are going to be able to weave in between the turbines to fish in these areas. So you are cutting off access and reducing the size of fishable areas that we have. If fishing areas are reduced, this is not rocket science. You are going to have the same number of vessels trying to draw fish from the same areas. This is going to lead to massive overfishing, thereby reducing the stock of fish in the area. It's also going to lead to vessels catching fewer fish, putting them out of business. And this is a major problem, a major disruption. The price of seafood will skyrocket. And you ordinary Americans that may like seafood, you're going to be the ones that have to bear the cost. Remember, it's the forgotten middle class. It's all you have to make the sacrifices, not the elite in society. If prices skyrocket, the elite still has the money to purchase seafood. However, the average American is not going to be able to afford it. But remember, you have to do your part. You have to sacrifice. It's in the name of saving the environment. It doesn't matter that those pushing these policies won't have to sacrifice a damn thing. That doesn't matter. You're not allowed to talk about that. So keep your mouth shut. They did their part. They did their part by pushing these policies, and they can now pat themselves on the back. And this plan, as it currently stands, will be devastating to the fishing industry. According to Rutgers, they did a study in New Jersey alone, may lose up to 25% of its fishing vessels if this goes forward. And it reminds me of the attacks we're seeing against the farmers, not just here in the United States, but throughout the world. You have all these politicians in such a rush to push policies that are going to hurt ordinary people and increase the cost of food and farming and agriculture. They push this agenda, consequences be damned. Notice that those dictating these policies, they're mostly from these large urban centers. They have no idea how to really farm or fish. They never get their hands dirty. I mean, do you really want those who have no clue how to farm or fish, especially on an industrial scale? Do you really want them to make agricultural policy? Do you really want them to dictate fishery policy? Do you not see how this is a recipe for disaster? When you look at crime, it's another area where you have a forgotten middle class. We have to suffer. They create these stupid bail reform laws that don't make any sense. You want to do bail reform for first-time nonviolent offenders? Fine. Everyone could agree with that. But throw violent offenders and repeat offenders behind bars where they belong. But we can't do that. And we can't do that because we have to placate the public virtue signalers who believe they are social justice warriors, pretending to fight against what they deem as an oppressive and institutionally racist system. Again, these people are frauds. They don't care. They don't care. They don't care about people in these communities. They don't care about who the victims in these communities are of the violent and repeat offenders. They get to live in their own neighborhoods outside of these communities, look themselves in the mirror, pat themselves on the back as if they're doing something good. Ordinary Americans in ordinary communities have to suffer and live like prisoners in their own homes because they're afraid to walk out on the street, but the public virtue signalers get to sleep well at night. You can't say anything about it. If you do, you're going to be labeled as a horrible human being, right? You criticize bail reform laws, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a domestic terrorist. Now, what would happen if we built reform houses in the elite wealthy zip codes, where those released would live in reform houses and have to stay in those elite zip codes until their trial? What do you think these public virtue signalers would say then? Do you think they would be okay with that? Do you think they'd be so welcoming? Do you think they would be happy with this policy? Do you think they would ever support such policy? Of course they wouldn't, because they're frauds. And you could see how they're frauds every day. Just look at the migrant situation. So most of the migrants are going to become illegal immigrants because they're never going to show up to their court dates. Last year, we had over 2.7 million people crossing over our border or overstaying their visas. That's combined. This year, we're expected to surpass that number and break new records. The situation in Texas has reached critical mass. And so Governor Abbott has begun to bus migrants to sanctuary cities, New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, those places. The political leaders in these cities constantly preach about how open and tolerant they are, how they're sanctuaries, how welcoming they are, and they encourage people to come there. They preach and encourage illegal immigrants, come to our cities. But they don't really believe the crap they're preaching. They can't even control themselves. They say it's unfair that Texas is doing this to them. They say what Texas is doing is wrong. And yet you have a Washington, D.C. city council member who stated, and this is a direct quote, "The governors of Texas and Arizona have created this crisis and have turned us into a border town." So see, they don't like it when they feel the effects of what Texas feels on a regular basis, and they're not feeling the effects, right? Texas is getting, and Arizona, I mean, they're overwhelmed, completely overwhelmed. So it's okay for Texas and Arizona to be overwhelmed. It's okay for their resources to be sucked dry. But the second that they send the migrants to your backyard, now it's unacceptable. The second that they send the illegal immigrants to your backyard, now we can't have that because you're turning us into a border town. Do they even listen to themselves when they talk? These people are devoid of any type of self-reflection whatsoever. They have that let-them-eat-cake attitude. Notice how they never say anything when the Biden administration was transporting these people in the dark of night throughout the country. They didn't care then because it wasn't publicly known. But now that Texas is sending them a few busloads, now they're overwhelmed. So ridiculous. And as I always say, we should have a law in the books that these people can't settle in communities already struggling, communities where we have high poverty rates, communities where the infrastructures are already crumbling, where the schools have already collapsed. Instead, send them to the elite zip codes that could sustain them. Keep burdening the forgotten middle class so that the virtue signalers can feel good about themselves. Well, maybe it's time the virtue signalers actually step up and sacrifice. Bring some of these bail reform people into their homes. Bring some of the illegal migrants into their homes. You know, jumping back to the whole fascist thing, the big thing that fascists promote is unity, and they accuse their political opponents of undermining national unity. Does that sound familiar to you? It's about unity through submission. Do what they say, and then we can have unity. Fascists will constantly berate representative government by screaming about gridlock and nothing getting done. They say gridlock exists because of a political opposition. If we just purged the system of the political opponents, then the government could start to get things done, and the people's lives will be better. Then they push their executive decrees by claiming national emergencies and states of emergencies. Again, who does that remind you of? Now, our system is based on compromise. If a compromise can't be established between the minority party and the majority party, nothing gets done. So be it. However, we constantly hear the words obstructionist when it comes to Republicans not going along with President Biden and Democrat agenda. However, Congress exists to obstruct the president, just so you're aware out there. They are not there to rubber stamp any type of agenda. They're not there to just rubber stamp the Democrat agenda, the Build Back Better Biden agenda. But that's how those in power want the system to work. Just think back before Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema caved to the Democrats in the Biden administration. Democrats were screaming that it was not right that two senators can hold up legislation. They said that when two senators can stop legislation, the system was broken. That was a lie, because it wasn't two senators. It was actually 52 senators that were opposing the president's Build Back Better agenda. And actually, out of that 52 senators, that was the bipartisan vote against that agenda. According to many Democrats and the talking heads in the media, it would be so much easier to get things done if a political opposition didn't exist. But don't worry, they're working on that too. Just take a listen to the rhetoric out there and who's domestic terrorist. Look at the national strategy. See, the forgotten middle class is the problem. Notice how they always say how their policies are going to be hard, but down the road, we're going to be better off. Notice how they say that we have to do our part. You know, whether it's giving billions of dollars to Ukraine, we have to do that. We have to give them all these military supplies, even if it means that we deplete our supplies, even if our stockpiles are so depleted that we're now below our own military readiness levels. But we have to do it because it's for the greater good, and we all have to suffer in the process. And I love these phony virtues. I'm willing to pay more in gas if it means I'm supporting this cause or that cause. I'm willing to pay more. They're willing to pay more until they have to pay more. That's the amazing part. I'm willing to pay more for food if it means we're going to save the planet. You know, they always require us to make sacrifices. And as I asked in the beginning of this episode, what are they sacrificing? What do they have to give up? They still go out and fly on private planes. They get to do whatever they want. They get to eat where they want. As long as they say stuff that makes them seem morally superior, then it's all good. In the United States, we fall for this BS every time. And there are too many that just listen to words rather than look at the words, match them up with the actions. Too many don't ask questions. And it reminds me of the lockdowns where we were told that we can't do anything. We have to remain in our homes. And if we question anything, we're horrible human beings. Yet the elitist fools were caught time and time again violating their own decrees. It was truly stunning, truly pathetic. But there was no outrage. There was no outrage. Most Americans just accepted it. Are you kidding me? And maybe I have some of these virtue signalers listening now, the ones who constantly preach how we should be living our lives and how we should be the ones making that sacrifice. But remember, they don't follow anything that they say. And if they are listening, I hope they are, I hope they know what frauds they are. I hope they reflect, look in the mirror, and think about what they say and how they live their lives. I hope they think deeply about what they are truly willing to give up, and they're going to see it's very little. Listen, it's easy to say you are willing to sacrifice if you don't have to make any sacrifices. If I ask every American, would you be happy receiving $3,000? I'm sure most would say yes, right? I mean, I would. I know that. Now, if I ask every American, would you be happy receiving $3,000 if it means that inflation is going to run rampant and cost you about $8,000 more per year in goods and services? The answer, you're going to get a much different answer. I could guarantee that. And I could do that with every issue. Should every person have health care? Yeah, it sounds like the morally right thing to do, right? We're decent human beings. We want to make sure that people are taken care of. But if I ask the question, say, should every person have health care if it means you have to sacrifice and accept a decline in the quality of your own health care so that we can meet the needs of the health needs of others, well, you're going to get a very different response now. Do you believe we should have stricter environmental regulations and be carbon-free to save the planet? Sure, it sounds great. Do you believe that we should have stricter environmental regulations where you're going to have to give up life's luxuries like air conditioning, gaming systems, meat, etc.? Well, again, the answer is going to be much different. Just take you on any issue. It's easier to be the public virtue signaler and try and make yourself feel like you're morally superior to everyone else and that you're a good person, but you're not, because you don't sacrifice a damn thing. It's much more difficult to practice what we preach. And yet the public virtue signalers seem to be winning out. Reason, logic, common sense, they're in short supply. Instead, people would rather inject emotions than take a step back and determine what's in our best interest and what's in our country's best interest. It's disgusting, because it's you and I, the forgotten middle class, that always bear the brunt of these disastrous policies. And when you think about it logically, the ones claiming that they are fighting for democracy are the same ones that want to dictate just about every aspect of your life and how you live your life. Does that sound like a free society to you? When it all goes to crap, who do you think is going to be there for you? Do you think it's going to be the phony public virtue signalers? Or do you think it's going to be your family, your friends, maybe your community? Ask yourself, is your life in better shape and more stable today than it was a few years ago? Is your personal economy doing better today or worse today? Has your quality of life improved or declined? When answering these questions, remember who your political officials are, and ask yourself if they deserve to remain in office or if we should vote the bums out. Now, I hope you found the content of this episode informative. We need to get people to start using their brains and realize what's going on and to ask questions, to push back. I encourage you to please share this episode with family and friends, because we're all in the same boat, right? If the whole system comes crashing down, we're all the ones that are going to be bearing the brunt of the fallout. So let's wake people up. Don't forget to give the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Take 30 seconds to write a review. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'm going to be back on Monday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.